This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you by BitRefill. BitRefill is the best way to spend your crypto in Latin America. Purchase gift cards or mobile refills from more than 3,500 brands in 186 countries instantly, safely, and privately. Visit bitrefill.com for more information. Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. My guest today is Aaron Stanley, host of the Brazil Crypto Report. Brazil Crypto Report is the English speaker's guide to Latin America's largest crypto ecosystem, aka Brazil. Aaron, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Where are you calling in from today? You in Brazil?
I am in Brazil, yes.
What part?
In Brasilia at the moment. Sort of a long story of how
interesting.
Long story of how I got here, which we can go through if you'd like. But
is that your base actually, or are you just visiting?
It is actually. It's my wife's family, or my wife is from Brasilia, and her family is here. And we came here in December of last year just to kind of spend the holidays. And her parents were having some health issues and stuff, so we stuck around for a bit, and put my son into a local school here, threw him into a Portuguese language school, and he's doing great. So we decided to stick it out, stay a few more years. So this is home base for the time being.
Interesting. Brasilia. We don't have too many gringos full-time in Brasilia. Although there was, on one of our previous podcast guests was, oh God, why am I forgetting his name? The fitness guy. But we have one guy who was living in Brasilia for 6 months. But you're definitely one of the few, I assume.
Yeah, you don't come across too many gringos here that don't work for an embassy or something. It's very much like a company town in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, who am I thinking of? What is it? Tom Rice? Oh my God, I met this dude in person in Portugal, and now I can't think of his name on the podcast. So, anyway, but yeah, so really cool. So you're from the States. You were mentioning to me offline that you're from Minnesota, lived in a couple different places in the States. Where'd you meet your wife, if I may ask?
So we met in Washington D.C. Actually, I lived there, moved there right during college or right after college. Stayed there for about 10 years. Met my wife there. She was there on like a student visa, basically, and so we've been married, I guess, almost 15 years now. So
Oh wow.
and ever since then, I've been kind of, I like a lot of gringos when they get married to a foreigner or whatever, they just make like a minimal effort to try to learn the language or assimilate into the culture. And I didn't want to be like that gringo who'd been married for 10 years and like couldn't say more than hello. So I took like a real effort to try to learn the language and just kind of understand Brazilian culture a bit more. And so I've just always had an interest in Brazil. It's just like a fascinating country that a lot of people just didn't really pay any attention to or really know anything about.
That's fascinating. So you were married more than 10 years living in the US the whole time, and only at year 12 or 13 decided, you know what, it's Brazil time.
Yeah, well, we actually came down here in it was the end of 20, like December of 2020. We came down here on kind of a whim, right? Where because it was during COVID lockdowns, right? So we're in Minnesota, it's freezing cold, and the schools were all shut down because of COVID. And my son was he was in a Spanish immersion kindergarten at the time, and so he switched over to virtual Spanish immersion kindergarten, which I realized was just a complete joke. And we're like, okay, like this kind of sucks. And a friend of mine was like, a friend of mine who also is married to a Brazilian here was like, dude, you work remotely. Like, what the hell are you still doing here? Just go there and hang out for a bit. And I was like, okay. So we came down here and we stayed for about half a year throughout the first half of 2021, and just stayed with my in-laws here. And it was interesting because there's like I've traveled a decent amount, right? Like I studied abroad in college, and I've been abroad for like work trips and vacations and stuff, but I'd never really like lived in a different country. So it was interesting just to sort of get over that psychological kind of barrier of like, wow, I can actually do this here. It's like I can go out on my own and I can talk to people and I can order food and I can go to the dentist and I can do, I can take an Uber. I can do all these things just on my own. I don't need somebody translating for me or anything. And it kind of broke down this psychological barrier of like, yeah, I could totally live here. Um, so we ended up going back to the US, and I guess it was summer 2021, stayed there for another like 18 months, I guess. And then we kind of made a decision just to come back here in last December, so about a year ago.
That's awesome. Yeah, we're definitely going to come back to all that about adopting to Brazil and a number of topics. But before we get too far into it, tell us a little bit about Brazil Crypto Report. So it's a Substack, it's a podcast. Tell us about what you got going on.
Yeah. So my background, my professional background is as a journalist. So I spent some years in Washington D.C. doing kind of political journalism, which kind of sucked just for a variety of reasons. I mean, it has perks, but it kind of sucked at the same time. So I tried to get out of that. Ended up kind of getting into crypto in like 2016. Not so much from the investing standpoint, but just from a reporting, like, just a narrative standpoint, where it's like, wow, this seems interesting. That it's probably going to be a big deal. It's probably worth paying attention to this. And then so I spent about 4 or 5 years working at CoinDesk, which is one of the largest crypto kind of trade
You worked at
publications, I guess.
CoinDesk.
Yeah, yeah. So I worked there for about 5 years,
Oh, wow.
and
Okay.
then I so during that bull run of 2021, when we were here in Brazil during that spring of 2021, when I think Bitcoin hit like 65,000, and it was just like sheer mania. I was here. I was working out of a WeWork here, or like a co-work space here in Brasilia, and I was like, oh well, since I'm here physically, I should try to go and meet some of the local kind of players, like who are the local kind of movers and shakers in the crypto world here. And there was basically like no information at all online about like who do I even go talk to, like how do I even find who's like the relevant people to go meet with. Like I couldn't find anything. And CoinDesk would sometimes cover stuff about Brazil, but it was usually like very just like shallow stuff, like about pyramid schemes and things of that nature. I mean, there was a lot of that stuff back then, but the coverage was not very, like, there was really no like English language resource at all on the market. And so I'm sitting myself, and this is while I'm having, every Uber driver I'm like talking to is like asking me like what coin you should be buying and all this kind of stuff. And like family members are like asking me for investment advice, and I'm like, this is crazy. Like how, like, this is a massive, you know, I mean, this is one of these crazy things where like Brazil is just like, just by itself, it's like the eighth or ninth largest economy in the world. And it's just this massive population, super tech savvy people. Um, but like nobody pays any attention to this market, right? And from for a variety of reasons, which we can talk about. But I realized at that point where I was like, hey, like this could be an interesting platform or an interesting opportunity to try to spin up like kind of a news and information service that's really focusing on the Brazil, like an English language resource on the Brazil crypto ecosystem. So kind of taking this whole like skill stacking philosophy, right? Where it's just take the things you're good at and just combine them together. It's like, okay, well, I'm a journalist by trade. I know a lot of stuff about Brazil and I know a lot of stuff about crypto. So let's kind of fuse all that together and see what we get. So, so Brazil Crypto Report has sort of turned into, started off as just kind of a newsletter where I'm documenting like, hey, this is some of the interesting stuff that's going on here. And it's turned into more of a bit of a broader product. Or I've got a podcast. I'm doing lots of news recaps, news analyses, different interviews with kind of local players, but also players that are looking to kind of get into the market. Doing majority in English. I do speak Portuguese, but I try to keep a majority of the content English because that's kind of more of the target audience, is really the kind of the professional stakeholder from the gringo stakeholders as well as the local Brazilian professional stakeholders, most of whom speak English. So I'm not interested in retail. I'm not telling people to like what leverage trading platforms they should be using or what airdrops they should be farming or that kind of stuff. But it's really more kind of B2B focused. Um, and it's been a nice niche to find, right? It's not like this massive audience, but I've got, basically like, the C suites of like every single like major company in Brazil that read my content. I'm getting like inbounds every day from gringo companies that are just like, hey, we need to do something in Brazil, but we have no idea where to even start. I'm like, well, great, you came to the right place. So so it's been a pretty interesting adventure in that regard. And what's interesting about it is that I was doing some audience kind of analytics the other day, and roughly like 70 to 80% of my audience is Brazilians, and that's the inverse of what I was expecting. I thought it was going to be really more gringos, right, who want to learn about what's going on here. But I'm actually getting like, yeah, it's like 70 80% of my readership is Brazilian people who are interested in. I mean, they just say like your content's just the best source of content about Brazil, like generally, irrespective of language. So that's turned out quite interesting. But it's been a kind of a fun ride. It's allowed me a chance to meet a lot of new people. I've always wanted to do a podcast, but I just never knew. Like, you have to kind of find like a niche, right? And it's like, yeah, I could do like a general crypto podcast where I talk about like what Bitcoin's doing today or something. But like, there's already a
Mhm.
gazillion people that do that. So like, how would I add value to the world by doing that? So I feel like with Brazil Crypto Report, it's like, okay, I'm producing some real value here that people are finding useful to their day to day and professional lives.
And in terms of the podcast, you're up to some 70 odd episodes, I believe.
Yeah, yeah. So we started. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like podcasting is such a weird kind of thing where you start off just sort of in your bedroom, like hunched under like a blanket or something, with a crappy microphone, and then you build it up over time. My wife is actually helping me with a lot of the editing and production. She's actually got a background in doing audio production and engineering, so she's super helpful. Um, and then I launched beginning of this year. I went on YouTube as well, so I introduced the video components, which makes it a little trickier. But it's also as far as podcasting goes, like you have to be on YouTube now, just because for discoverability purposes, like the search engine is
Mhm.
just so powerful there that you just have to be there. So so yeah, so we're going on 73 episodes now, trying to put out like at least one a week, sometimes two. This week I'm putting out two. Mostly I'm doing interviews, but I've been kind of experimenting with more kind of short, like 12 to 15 minutes, like kind of
Solo
news
episodes.
recap, like
Mm.
this is what happened this week in 10, because according to like podcast people that I know, like they explain that apparently like an episode that's maybe 10 to 15 minutes long is usually the most downloaded, um, for whatever reason. Not entirely sure why, but those kind of shorter, punchier episodes tend to get the most downloads,
Mm.
vis-a-vis like kind of an hour-long conversation like we're doing here.
Mhm.
Maybe just because it's just shorter and quicker. You can pack it in while you're at the gym or whatever. But trying to kind of experiment with different formats, kind of see what people like, see what sticks, see what doesn't. But it's really fun actually. It's kind of like having a superpower. It's like it kind of opens up this whole new world that you wouldn't have been able to access otherwise. Just by having a podcast and kind of building an audience like this.
Right. Kind of gives you an excuse to connect with people.
Yeah, it's like the analogy I use is it's like inviting someone to your birthday party, right? Like, yeah, they might say no, but like, you know, you're only going to be extending goodwill by inviting the person. Like they'll still appreciate the fact that you offered, right, or you invited them.
Mhm.
So there's really no risk basically to inviting somebody on your show.
This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you by Language Blend, the new best way to learn Spanish. Language Blend focuses on what you actually need to live and get by abroad. With daily one-on-one lessons, a dedicated texting partner, it's like living in a Spanish-speaking country without ever leaving home. Go to languageblend.com for more information. Yeah, and I'm looking at your crypto reports, not the reports, not the podcast. Um, and the reports are very detailed and actually of excellent quality, where you're going into the news of the week. This is what the regulators did. This is what the latest market index fund did, or the release, or someone raised money, blah, blah, blah. And it's very detailed. You got quotes, you got sources. It's not just like off the cuff, you writing about random stuff. Like it really does attempt to be like a coin desk for Brazil.
Yeah, so a lot of what I do is a lot of aggregation, right? So because I can read Portuguese pretty well, like it allows me to rip through a lot of like the local language content like pretty quickly.
Hmm.
Because I know the subject matter well and I know the language well enough where I can read through, like a Valor Econômico article, or I mean, a lot of times I'll just pop it into Google Translate because it's obviously easier to read in your own language if you're in a hurry. Um, but I try to do a lot of aggregation, and then I try to do a lot of just curation around like what are the most important stories that happened this week and what are the things that people should be paying attention to. So
Yeah.
and I'm kind of writing it with like the gringo audience in mind, right? So it's like why should some like I'm writing this like the ideal target audience is some executive in a gringo company who's kind of like why the hell should I care about Brazil. And it's like, hey, like look at all this cool stuff that's happening. We've got Bitcoin ETFs here that are outperforming everything else. We've got regulatory clarity incoming, whereas in the U.S. things are still kind of a disaster. We've got the central bank here is building out this what I believe is going to be the most innovative like central bank digital currency project that exists
Hmm.
globally. I'm not personally not a huge fan of central bank digital currencies, but at some point it's sort of like
Brazil's
King
working
Canute
on it.
telling the
Yeah.
tide to stop, right? It's like these things are going to happen irrespective of whether we
Yeah.
like them or not.
Well, we'll have to come
So,
back to that because that's definitely a big
sure.
topic in and of itself, as you said. But you
Yeah,
you
yeah.
get like some really juicy stories. Like I just opened up one and I'm looking through it and it's hilarious. Pharaoh of Bitcoins, Gleitson Acacio dos Santos bought a 3.9 million reais jet with the help of a former ally, Pablo Escobar, named Ricardo Gomez. The plane arrived in Brazil, blah, blah, blah. Pyramid scheme, blah, 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 arrested by the federal police. So that's like one article. The very next one, Palmeiras footballer Mikey Oliveira is seeking money back from another footballer who accused them of cheating him of millions of reais in cryptocurrency investments, claimed to have lost 7.8 million reais, blah, blah, blah. So that's like some good drama. You know what I mean? And you got your
Yeah.
sources. Um, so it's fun. Like it's not just the latest projects and stuff like that. You've definitely dug up some juicy stuff as well. Very next one, Prince of Bitcoin, Rio de Janeiro, arrested, 4 counts, seizures, company, blah, blah, blah. So like lots of like good
Yeah.
stuff in here.
Yeah, Brazil's interesting I mean this is kind of what it took me a while to like really understand is that like everything in Brazil is like it's like one extreme or the other. And it might be this way in other Latin American countries. I'm more of a Brazilianist than I'm like a Latin Americanist, I guess. But like it's like it's like people on the street are either like really fat or they're like super jacked, right? Like the bad guys here are real like James Bond villain type bad guys. Or like people here are like super rich or like super poor, right? Everything's like one extreme or the other. And these pyramid scheme guys uh that have been running these like Bitcoin pyramid schemes the last few years. Coming out of from the U.S., it's like yeah, you hear about these scams every now, or I guess you could say Sam Bankman-Fried was like the biggest pyramid schemer of them all, and look what happened. So maybe Brazil doesn't compare to that, but like these kind of like just more general like scam, like retail focused scams. It's not like it's like they're sophisticated enough to the point they're not like Nigerian prince scams. They're not like cold calling grandma asking her to send bitcoins. It's not that kind of stuff. It's like these are like actual like commercial operations where these guys will have, you know, they'll have like a skyscraper in like the center of the city. Like they'll have like the
Hmm.
mayor and like the local congressman involved. And it's like these are just like super, you know, I don't want to say like maybe sophisticated isn't the right word because they're not. It's like all they're doing is just taking people's money and then like just sending it off to a Swiss bank or something. It's not like anything, it's not like anything novel on that front, but just the way these things are marketed and built up and the size of these things. And you've got these characters like the Pharaoh of Bitcoins, and you've got like the Sheik of Bitcoins, which is another scammer. You've got the Prince of Bitcoins. Like all these guys, they have these kind of larger than life nicknames and like these larger than life personalities. And there's actually one town out to the, I believe it's to the west or the east of Rio, called Cabo Frio, where like there was so many pyramid schemers, Bitcoin pyramid schemers, like in this town, like the Pharaoh of Bitcoins and some of these other things. Like there's actually a nickname for the town called like New Egypt. It's either like New Egypt or Little Egypt or something, because there's so many pyramid schemes going on there. So, and like all these Bitcoin pyramid scheme guys have like operations there, and it's and like they kind of prey on like people in evangelical churches and stuff. Like they'll go into these like church groups and start just hitting people up. For even my aunt, my wife's aunt lives there, and I was asking, I was like, Chia, like, have you ever heard of this guy, the Pharaoh of Bitcoins? And she's like, oh, like, yeah, like all my friends like gave him all their money, and like it's like, and it's like these. I think what happens is, I mean, for looking at from the outside, you're like, how can people be this dumb to like give these people their money, right? But I think there's two factors that I kind of ascribe to some of this. Where, excuse me, I think financial literacy and education here is maybe just like not great, like across the board. Like there's some room for improvement there. But I think also like because Brazilians and probably Latinos more generally are just so like the affinity network is so much more of like just familial, right? So if like people will make decisions based on just what somebody in their family, like somebody that's close to them, recommends them to do, not necessarily because it's like a great decision otherwise or like empirically speaking, but they'll be like, oh, like Chia so and so said she made like 10x, giving her money to this like Pharaoh Bitcoins guy, so like I'm going to do it too. So I think there's just like a lot of that goes on, that people just invest in stuff because like a friend referred them or like a family member referred them. um but there is actually a new law on the books now that is uh basically creating like much harsher penalties for people who run like these cryptocurrency pyramid schemes in Brazil. So hopefully that will mitigate, future sort of collapses like this. But the amount of money that's been lost to these schemes is ridiculous. It's like a ridiculous amount. It's something like 100 billion reais since 2017 or something, which would be about 20,
Whoa.
like 20 would be about like 20. I don't. I can't
Call
remember if
it
that's the
20
right number or
billion.
not.
Yeah.
It's like it's. I mean, it's like a shitload of money basically that people have lost in these pyramid schemes. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but it's like when I saw it, I was like, oh man, like that's even for like when you do the conversion in your head into dollars, you're like, holy crap, that's a lot of money.
So just to switch gears a little bit, just a couple of kind of fun questions just to keep it rolling. The logo, where it's like the Brazilian map, but with the green squares, the green and black squares. What's the story behind that?
Um, yeah, I mean, back at the time when I was starting this up, kind of the whole like pixelated image, like NFTs were really in style, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, NFTs are kind of collapsed now, but the idea was I was trying to think of something that was like, what's a logo that's interesting but isn't just like a cheesy like slap a picture of a Bitcoin on on a picture of Brazil or something, or on the Christ the Redeemer statue. Like trying to think of something that maybe a little more novel. So that's what I kind of landed on. Um, I'm I'm like it's like one of these things where it's like I don't like particularly like it, but I've kind of like come to accept it as like, yeah, it's my logo. But again, I'm not like a super aesthetic person either, so I should probably just hire somebody to do all this stuff for me. But that's what I got for now, and I've kind of like come to accept it. It's like, all right, this looks pretty good.
And you've decided to go with the Substack, and that seems to be going pretty well. You have over 2,000 subscribers there, which is awesome. Why did you decide to go with Substack as opposed to a website? Because when I look at your link tree, I don't even see like a domain to say BCR, BrazilCryptoReport.com.
Yeah, well, so I have a website now that I'm building up right now. I haven't really gone officially live with it, but at the time it was, I mean, Substack was kind of, I mean, this was like summer 2021 when I started doing this. So Substack was kind of the like the platform that everyone was starting their own Substacks, at least in crypto anyway. It was kind of like the thing to do. So I
Hmm.
wanted to experiment a bit with self publishing and that kind of thing. And at the time, like Substack was kind of the best platform out there. It was just super easy, like plug and play. You don't really have to worry about anything aside from just writing and getting people to sign up. Um, and then I've got about been able to build up about like 2,000 followers on Substack. I've also been cross posting on LinkedIn, so I've got about another 2,000 subscribers on LinkedIn. So I've got about 4,000 total. LinkedIn is actually like a pretty like sneakily powerful platform for newsletters, even though the interface kind of sucks. But if you have if you have a lot of connections on LinkedIn, like those, the newsletter can get distributed to all those people basically that are already
Hmm.
connected to you or following you. So it's actually especially if you're like with my audience is more of a B2B audience. So it was like, it made more sense to really put a bit more effort into LinkedIn. Though I didn't really like it too much at first. Um, and then, yeah, and as far as the content goes, when you have a full on kind of blog website, I feel like there's a bit more of like the types of content you can do are a little different. Like with it having a newsletter, you're kind of limited just based on the amount of newsletters you can send out. So, and like, which, if I'm only sending out one newsletter a week, it's fine. But if I want to put out, other types of content, I can't be like blasting my subscribers with newsletters every day. So that's why I'm building out the website so I can have a spot where other types of kind of more explainer content or interviews or other things can live. Um, and then, and the other interesting thing is there's a lot of other like kind of Substack competitors that are popping up now. So things like Beehive and like ConvertKit and some other things that I think if I was starting over again, like I would definitely use one of these other platforms because I feel like Substack is kind of it feels like it's kind of like a dying platform in some ways in terms of just the community around it and it's just I haven't and I've had the same conversation with other Substackers too, where they feel like it's just the energy around it's just kind of dying, and a lot of the energy around the news in the newsletter media world anyway is going to places like Beehive or platforms like Beehive, I should say.
Hmm.
Uh, but for someone who's just looking for a quick and easy way to just start without having to worry about, like how I got to hire somebody to design a website and whatever, all this kind of stuff. Uh, like Substack was just super easy. Like
It
you
makes
just pretty
sense. It seems
much,
like a good hack to kind of get the followers going on a platform that already exists, like LinkedIn or whatever. Build that up, and then
yeah,
start funneling traffic to a website once you get that going.
yeah. And I think, I mean, the one problem that Substack really has is that the SEO is really bad. So, and that's what I didn't realize that until, I guess I didn't really go down the SEO rabbit hole until a few months ago, and I realized that Substack is just the SEO is just not very good natively. So I think I was missing out on a lot of traffic just because, like, you couldn't find me if you Googled me. Everything was kind of like all my leads were coming in just through social media and stuff like that. Um,
Hmm.
so having your own website that's like more SEO optimized, even if it's just kind of a landing page type of thing, but you can still send out your newsletters, but at least you have the main landing page. That's what I'm building out right now. So that should hopefully get me a little bit more visibility. And I'm also planning on offering a few other kind of services like on top of that, on top of the audience, right? So like I have, once you have the audience, it's a question of like, okay, what can I do now to sort of monetize it, right? So doing sponsorships or doing consulting, or had some people inquire about doing PR work, um, or even just doing kind of other, kind of like VC deal flow type stuff. Once you have the audience, there's a lot of interesting things you can do with it. As you surely know pretty well, since you've got a pretty decent sized audience here and have been doing this for a while. But having the website on top of the Substack definitely helps open up some of that.
Hey guys, quick interruption to tell you about Bitrefill. BitRefill is the best way to convert your crypto into gift card balances. These are gift cards that you can spend at hotels.com, Airbnb, Nike, and many more. You may remember Joel Valenzuela, previous podcast guest. He's been living on crypto exclusively since 2015, and he's a big consumer of BitRefill. And so I asked Joel, I said, what do you like most about BitRefill? He said that he likes the instant delivery, the precise amount so that you don't have to juggle a lot of gift cards, and he loves the global selection. Nobody else has this much selection of gift cards, over 10,000 gift card options across hundreds of countries. Go to bitrefill.com to sign up, and you can also use the code MyLatinLife for 10% back off your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information. Yeah, for sure. Let's talk a bit about just the ecosystem in Brazil in general from a crypto perspective. I know it's probably pretty hard to summarize, but maybe what's unique about the Brazil crypto ecosystem? How integrated is it with the rest of Latin America versus sort of its own standalone thing? Where would you put Brazil, maybe also in kind of the world hubs of crypto? I guess a lot of questions, but feel free to take it whatever way you want to go with it.
Yeah. So the place I always start is with there's this blockchain analytics firm called Chainalysis, and every year they put out this huge like 100-page report called like the geography of cryptocurrency, and they kind of rank every country based on cryptocurrency usage and adoption, both in terms of using like centralized exchanges and decentralized finance protocols and like peer to peer, and then they kind of break out institutional versus retail trades. So like things that are like above or below $10,000 worth of
Mhm.
value, and they kind of break all that stuff out and they put it into this huge report. And Brazil came in ninth globally. Last year it was seventh, and this year it's ninth. So that just kind of gives you an indicator of like in Brazil. I mean, if you do the math, Brazil is basically like the ninth largest economy in the world in terms of GDP, like from
Mhm.
at least from most recent year, I think, or that stats are available for that.
Mhm.
So it kind of makes sense that Brazil is basically where it should be in terms of crypto adoption. Um, but yeah, but the landscape here is quite unique in the sense that it's not, the economy here and like kind of the monetary system here is not just a total dumpster fire like in Argentina, where like you just have to get out of the pesos like as quick as possible, and people are using Tether USDT to hedge and whatnot. You don't necessarily have that like urgency here, but you still have quite a bit of demand for stable coins like dollar peg stable coins.
Mhm.
I think something about most recent month that there's numbers available. It's something like 80-90% of all volumes are in stable coins. Um, that's a mix between, and that was about like 3 to 3.5 billion US dollars worth of value. So you have a mix of both
And what
people.
stable coins are they using in Brazil? Is there like some ones
So
down there that are more popular?
well, it's predominantly USDT, right?
Okay.
And then USDC has like a fairly has a footprint. It's a small footprint relatively. There's also a Brazilian real pegged stablecoin called BRZ, which has pretty significant volume as well. But they were somewhat closely linked. I mean, like most of the liquidity was on FTX. So when
For the
FTX collapsed
BRZ?
last year, yeah. So when FTX collapsed, that
Yeah.
that project that coin has became a little bit less, I guess, desirable for various reasons. Uh, and you've got a lot of other kind of new like Brazilian real peg stablecoin projects popping up. I just did a recording with a couple of guys that launched one a couple weeks ago, and really, I think the value proposition for some of these is less as like a store of value, right? Like if you want to use stablecoin as store of value, you're going to go into USD, not into you're not going to trade in your fiat real for a blockchain based real. But like they're using these as basically on ramps in and out of in and out of the like kind of the crypto world, right? So a lot of these platforms will have like kind of Pix integrations, so I can just send a Pix
Right.
and then boom in my
So the
MetaMask
crypto's
wallet.
integrating with Pix. Can you explain what Pix is? And that sounds pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, so well, Pix is the instant payment service that's run by the central bank that was rolled out about 3 years ago, like November, December 2020. And I mean, this is basically the most like successful fintech experiment in the world to date, right? It's basically it incorporates a lot of like components of crypto and blockchain. Actually, it's like it's using kind of like public key cryptography and all these kind of, except it's not on a distributed ledger. It's all just run on a centralized ledger out of the central bank. But basically, like I can send, I can just scan a QR code and like send somebody, 10 reais, 2 reais, whatever, 100 reais. And it happens instantaneously. And
Hmm.
you can send these things even if you're offline. Like I just paid a guy, like an ice cream vendor guy the other day. He didn't even have
Oh, really? Even if there's
his
no Wi-Fi or whatever?
Yeah, so you can do these things with like contact. I'm not sure exactly how they do that, but you can do like basically like offline payments with Pix. So
Hmm.
and then the thing is like there's no fees. So like you can buy, you can buy a coconut from a guy on the side of the road for like 3 reais and he'll accept Pix. Like a lot of like you can just scan his code and then boom, like you've got your coconut and you're on the way. So whereas like a guy like this would never like accept a card, like it just wouldn't make any sense. So so right now, like the numbers of Pix adoption is just like ridiculous. It's something like I can't even remember. I mean, it's like something like 150 billion transactions a year or something. It's like it's an absurd amount, and it's
Hmm.
basically I think it's like 150 million a day transactions per day that are running on this, and it's processing about 3 to 4 thousand transactions per second.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
So Pix is
it's
very dominant. And
yeah.
then how do we layer crypto on top of that?
Also, the most immediate way is using Pix as a basically a payment channel to get into the crypto world, right? As the on ramp in. So
Ah,
you'll have
okay.
integrations where I can just send a Pix to like my MetaMask wallet or something, or basically I can just send it to my exchange account or something. Say I'm using like Coinbase, and like I
Hmm.
so Coinbase has a Pix integration now here, so I can just send a Pix to my Coinbase account or my Coinbase wallet, and that conversion will just be made automatically. Where it'll be deducted from the reals will be deducted from my bank account, and they'll show up in my Coinbase account as either as like fiat reais or as like a local as a stable coin or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, so that's the most immediate entry. That's the most immediate use case for Pix is just that provides a really seamless on and off ramp basically. And what's interesting is that this has really become like the key way by which people are like interfacing with crypto or buying crypto now. And an interesting example of that is, but it wasn't this last June, but it was June of 2022, where Binance, which is the largest exchange here, like in the world, but obviously like in Brazil as well, is what 50-60% of the trading volume. They actually got into a dispute with their payments or service provider that offered their Pix on and off ramps. And there's like this big legal battle that's still going on actually. But the result is that, like Binance, they went without a Pix integration for like 3 weeks, like almost a month, where they didn't have a payment processing partner on the ground here. So people you couldn't buy or sell, or you couldn't, in on ramp, off ramp with Binance using Pix anymore. And they end up losing like a pretty decent percentage of market share just based on that. I mean, they ended up gaining it back like a few months later when FTX collapsed, but it was an interesting example that showed really how predominant Pix has become. You know, it's like if you're going to be a crypto platform in Brazil, like you have to have a Pix integration, or at least have like a local service provider who has that Pix integration that you can basically kind of your platform can be added to, or you can utilize their services.
Wow, that's interesting. Um, Incredible. I remember last time I was in Brazil, it was almost like pre-Pix, and everything was credit card based. And it was really fascinating that the acai guy in the street would take credit card. The guys that sell beer in the street, they like walk down the street with a shopping cart of beer. You could just buy like 2 beers off a guy with credit card, which I thought was incredible. That it was so credit card advanced. Has that largely been replaced by Pix, or do most vendors accept both?
Most people will take both, generally speaking, but a lot of people will have a strong preference toward Pix now, just because of the fee question, right? You're not paying 3%
Right.
on the swipe fee, and for a lot of these guys, like the like Pix is it's basically like using cash, right? It's like you're just sending. It's like if you go to lunch with somebody and you pay the bill and like it's like, oh, just send me a Pix to
Okay.
for the
You can't
for
dispute
your
it.
half.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like
like
Venmo.
yeah, it's like a Venmo. It's like Venmo, but it's just everywhere. It's just ubiquitous, right? And it's super interesting just because this is like you look like you don't really associate Brazil as being this like hub of like government technological innovation. But this isn't like an Obamacare website kind of thing. Like this is like a real solution that people
Mhm.
use, not because they're forced to use it. They use it because it works and it's better than the alternatives. And you have something like 90% of adults in Brazil are using this now, and that's just three years after it was launched. And you have 90% of people using it, which is just insane. Like I don't even know if like ChatGPT like got that fast of adoption, right?
Adoption.
Like
Yeah, it's
uh,
crazy.
so it's super interesting what they've been able to do here.
Okay. Yeah, I probably detoured you from the question as well, just around crypto in Brazil and maybe some distinctive characteristics of the Brazilian crypto ecosystem.
Yeah, so I think the big difference here is that compared to another developed market like the U.S. or Europe or some of the Asian markets, I think I guess one similarity first is because the payments issue has largely been solved because of Pix, what we were just talking about. Uh, you don't really need like the whole crypto as a payments use case is not like really relevant here, just because like you already have Pix, so who cares? Uh,
Mm.
so it's crypto is definitely viewed as like an investment or as at least as a store of value or as a hedge. Um, and then you have like in other countries you have there's basically like like three different types of brokerages that operate here. You have kind of like your local, just sort of like ham and egger type brokerages that were kind of born here and in the mid 2010s and are still around. You have like
Ham
your
and egger.
Binance, right? Like just kind of they tropicalize it. They
That's
just
got to be a Minnesota or Wisconsin phrase.
maybe it might it's like it's like your meat and potatoes type exchange where
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
all
yeah,
right, like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
nothing fancy but it does the trick.
I got you.
Uh, and then you have like your overseas exchanges like your Binances that come in and they're basically able to kind of clean house against like the local guys because they just have a better tech and they're kind of playing this regulatory arbitrage game and whatnot, and they offer better spreads and better pricing because they have more liquidity. And then but the unique, I mean that's not super unique, but like the unique thing about Brazil is that you have these huge fintech platforms that have all rolled out crypto to their user bases. So Nubank, for example, like you've probably heard of Nubank if you're in Latin
Yep.
America. It's something like
Yep.
90 million customers. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's big
it's
in
just this.
Mexico now too.
Is it really okay?
Yeah,
I knew they were
it was their
expanding
first.
into.
It was their first international expansion.
Was it okay? Yeah, because
Yeah.
I know they have a presence in like Colombia and Mexico. I wasn't sure like how it's predominantly Brazil, but like I know they're kind of expanding. But yeah, something like 90 million customers, and I think it was July of last year they rolled out a crypto product within their app, the Nubank app. So now you can buy Bitcoin, ETH, Solana, Bitcoin Cash if you want to buy that, but you can do that all within the platform. And within I think 3 weeks or something after they launched that, they had over 1 million users already buying crypto on their app. Right. So
Hmm.
uh and I know the volumes have like continued to be pretty strong even despite the kind of the the downturn. And you've also got a platform like Mercado Pago, which also has a similar product that's got well over 1 million users. You had PicPay. PicPay had, I heard they had something like 3.5 million users. PicPay is just kind of like another Nubank type of thing, but they had something like 3.5 million users. But they're sunsetting their product now for reasons I don't entirely understand. But from what I understand, they had a lot of users, but I think they're trying to take the company public or something, and there's some, they just didn't want to deal with crypto or during that process or something. But then you also have things like BTG Pactual has its own crypto brokerage, like a retail facing crypto brokerage app. Um, XP Investimentos had one, but they closed that down as well. So anyway, so the point is that you have a lot of these these fintechs that have massive adoption, that have that are rolling out these crypto products to their customers, and people are using them, right? People are buying crypto on these platforms, and that's something that's kind of unique because I mean, in the U.S. you have like Cash App and PayPal and stuff, but I mean, how many people are going to go to PayPal just to buy Bitcoin? I don't, maybe, but there's definitely better places you could do that. Um, so anyway, so that's super interesting, is that you just have these fintechs that have been able to really garner major adoption
Hmm.
within the market, are getting, they're really getting, they've launched these crypto platforms, and they're getting usage out of it. And
Yeah,
and
makes sense.
and about a year, in about a year's time, there's going to be, the central bank here is going to be unveiling like a licensing regime for becoming a
Oh
licensed
God.
crypto brokerage here. So at that point, a lot of the big banks are going to be jumping in and starting to offer their own products as well. So your
And
Itaús.
hey everybody, quick break from the podcast to tell you about Language Blend, the best new way to learn Spanish. Language Blend was co-founded by Jake Nomada, friend of the podcast, decade of experience in Latin America, and Jake and his team, they put everything into this program that they wish they had in terms of how to level up quickly with your Spanish language skills. Because the faster that you can get conversationally fluent in Spanish, the better the experience that you're going to have in Latin America. So go to languageblend.com for more information.
And your
Makes sense.
Santanders and stuff.
Also worth mentioning that Brazil is one of the biggest VC funding ecosystems in Latin America. It might even be number one, or Mexico's number one, but those are the big two, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So you have, I mean, I think a lot of the VCs here are definitely more probably like Web 2 focused. Um, I think they're all kind of, I was at this like startups LATAM, the Latitude conference a
Hmm.
couple of weeks ago in Sao Paulo, and it's a lot of,
That's awesome.
it's a lot of guys that are, they're looking for the next ride share app or like food delivery app that's gonna moon or whatever.
Right.
So there's like a lot of the VCs here, like they'll invest in like blue chip stuff. So you have like Valor Capital. I mean, they've invested in like Bitso and some other things, Hashdex, which has a bunch of like Bitcoin ETF products here. So the VC funding is still probably a little more focused on Web 2 than maybe other markets. And I think some of that might just be because there's not as many like kind of interesting like crypto startups, Web3 startups per capita here as you have in
Hmm.
other markets. So it's kind of, I think you kind of have like a chicken and egg problem a little bit, where it's like the VCs will show up when there's good projects to invest in, but the good projects aren't there because they don't think they can get money or whatever. So there's definitely some room to grow on that front. But there is definitely the VC scene here is definitely it's definitely pretty robust.
That's good. And I think there's a paradox that I want to present. You had mentioned a potential topic for the episode was why Brazil and Latin America remains a forgotten continent. And I think LATAM's definitely having a bit of a moment right now with just how poorly managed Europe and Canada and the United States are. But Brazil, I often joke, is like the final frontier of Latin America. because most people won't go, largely because the language barrier, also just because it is quite far away in terms of the flights. But hey, people still do go to Buenos Aires and stuff. Why is Brazil the final frontier? Why is it the forgotten continent?
It's a great question. Yeah, I think, yeah, like you have so many people in the US and stuff that, like, they just assume that all of Latin America is like Spanish speaking. I think there's a lot of people that, they don't even really recognize that this is a separate country here, or they have these kind of backward perceptions about Brazil where it's like, oh, they just like play soccer and, hang out at the beach and, whatever. Um, yeah. And yeah, it's an interesting question because, I mean, for one, it's like, I don't think Brazil is very good at like just promoting themselves generally, irrespective of what industry you're talking about, right? It's one of these things where it's like you don't really like, if you're like a successful like singer or something here in Brazil, like you don't even need to like bother to expand outside of the market here because there's 200 million people that are gonna be following you, right? Which that's a pretty big universe of people to tap into, right? So I think it's just a very like insulated culture in a lot of ways, right? And I was even just using this example to a friend the other day where like I can't remember, like I've probably taken 500 to 1,000 Uber rides here in Brazil, in
Mhm.
in Sao Paulo, Rio, Brasilia. I think I've only had one foreign Uber driver, like one guy who was like not born here, like not a Brazilian guy. He was from like Serbia or something, some random place. But every other Uber driver I've had has been a local. Where like when I lived in Washington D.C., for example, I think I may have had like one American Uber driver in like 10 years. Like when I lived in Minnesota, I don't think I had any Americans. It was all Somalian people. Um, and look, it's not necessarily to slight any like, everyone's has the right to hustle and
Yeah,
make a living, or
Brazil's
whatever.
definitely
But like,
less international. Like there's some
yeah, it's
Haitians, there's some
very,
Venezuelans, but some Portuguese
yeah,
maybe, but not too many foreigners. It's really
yeah, exactly. It's a very sort of like isolate. It's almost like Japan in a sense, right? Where it's like this, it's kind of this very inward focused culture, right? And I think Japan has, if you think about just geographically, like Japan obviously was like this island nation that was protected by water. It had this geographic barrier of water, so it wasn't really easy for other people to get there. Brazil's kind of the same way in the sense that it's not really an easy place to get to. If you're coming from the west, you have to go through all the jungle and stuff. If you're coming from the east, like you have to travel across the ocean or whatever. And it's just not the easiest place to get to, right? So I think part of it's that, and I think the other part is just like there's just this tendency of lumping in Brazil with just the rest of Latin America, on the part of gringos, um, and I think like there's not like a like people always just think of like, oh, it's just Brazil, like Brazil and LATAM is just, it's just the same thing. We'll include it in our strategy, our LATAM strategy, whatever, without realizing that these are like totally different countries. I mean, I was just on a call the other day with somebody who, with a company, and they're looking to do some kind of influencer marketing in Brazil and try to get some, uptake for their product in Brazil. And they were asking me like, oh, do you think it'd work if we just take this content that we have in Spanish, these like videos and whatever, and, we just put like Portuguese subtitles on them and like, post them on Instagram in Brazil. And I was like, yeah, that's probably not that's probably not a very good idea, right? It's like people are either going to be it's either gonna not go over. It's just not gonna work, or people are gonna be like really pissed because you think that they speak Spanish here. It's like not gonna go over very well. So so and I think the other part of this too is just that Brazil is just kind of a complicated place, right? It's that old saying like Brazil is not for beginners. It is just a complicated place for a variety of reasons. Um and you know but I think it does kind of remain this like mysterious place for which is kind of what I like about it, right? Like I like being in these places where like I'm the only gringo, like there's nobody else here.
Mhm.
I kind of like that allure of it. Um, but like why it remain, but I think it's just it's just not it's just a country that doesn't like, it's not something we like learn about in school in the US of like, oh, we're learning about like, Chiridenchis, and we're learning about how the Portuguese crown like fled Lisbon in 1808 and they resettled in
Yep.
Rio de Janeiro, like nobody
Right.
learns that
Right.
stuff, right? Even though it's like a pretty
Yeah.
cool story, but like we don't learn about that, right? Uh, and frankly, it's like a lot of people, I tell them I'm writing this newsletter about crypto in Brazil, people are like, oh wow, they have internet in Brazil. It's like, yeah, like they have more mobile devices per capita than anybody else.
I know
So
they're like addicted.
yeah, it's and I think I honestly think kind of like the Instagram TikTok culture here is
It's
it's kind of
insane.
like it's having like a deleterious effect on just like the overall like warmth of the people and stuff. I think the smartphone addiction. I mean, look, like I'm addicted to my smartphone as much as anybody else, so I shouldn't really criticize. But, um, but it's like it's kind of like the addiction is like another level here from what I've seen elsewhere. It's like like 18-year-old kids that are like or 18-month-old babies that are like can't even like look away from the cell phone kind of thing. It's I feel like it's really had a bit of a negative impact, but I think that's probably worldwide as well. But it seems more pronounced here, at least in my view.
They keep coming up with good dances though.
Exactly.
No, we do got to get wrapping up because I have another call in a couple of minutes. Couple random notes here. So Ted Rice is the guy I was thinking of at the beginning of the episode. I'll hit him up, see if he's still around Brasilia.
Okay.
Get you guys in touch. Another one is Patrick Flood at LatAm Stocks on Twitter. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to connect with him.
Yeah. Patrick's great. Yeah,
Awesome. Yeah,
I like
we
I
recorded a
like his content.
podcast like a week ago. So yeah, you guys, good that you guys are in touch. What I want to do is because this one, we kind of just scratching the surface there, and we're just kind of just chatting it up, seeing what's up, seeing what you're working on. But let's definitely try to do more stuff with Brazil in the future. Maybe get you and Patrick on together, or I was almost thinking like a Brazil roundtable podcast episode, something like that.
Oh yeah, that'd be fun. I would love that.
Yeah. So we'll definitely look for more ways to collaborate in the future. But yeah, man, please take this time to direct the audience's attention once more to the Substack, to the podcast, and wherever you want them to go.
Yeah, so it's just Brazil Crypto Report in the standard English spelling, and it's brazilcrypto.io is the website, and you can also find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, all the various places just with that handle, and then I'm pretty findable also on LinkedIn as well. Just Aaron Stanley is my full name. But yeah, it's the content's free to read, so would appreciate if you find this interesting. Definitely sign up, stay abreast of what's happening. I am trying to do a bit more coverage of the rest of Latin America as well, of Spanish Latin America. I've got a person in Bogota who's been doing a lot of, kind of, it's not as much as I would like to be doing, but at least it's something where we're kind of doing news roundups of what's happening in some of the other Spanish speaking countries
Mm-hmm.
on the crypto front. So definitely encourage you to sign up if that's of interest.
Cool. Brazil. Are you working towards that Brazil passport? You get it already? Still on it?
I got my residence now. The passport is the next step. So, but I'm becoming more convinced I need to get this moving here after seeing all of your tweets. So thank you for the motivation. So,
Yes, sir. Good. Well, thank you for coming on and talking about crypto in Brazil. This is a fun one. Our first podcast specifically on this topic, and something we're definitely going to have to explore more in the future. Again, my guest today, Aaron Stanley from the Brazil Crypto Report. This has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Thanks everyone for listening.
thank you.